Okay, so today we're finally going to finish off the book of Job. We've got a few chapters left to read in Job. One last major section. Now God is going to speak. If you remember in our last session, our last reading, we heard through the words of a young man, younger than the rest at least, named Elihu, who is there to bridge the gap between the conversation that Job and the other three guys were having and the one that God is going to have now that he comes along. So Elihu changes our mindset from what it had been in the main part of the book, when it was just Job and the three kind of talking in circles endlessly and pointing towards God. And at the end of Elihu's section, it seemed like he was describing a thunderstorm that was approaching them as he was speaking. And now here in Job chapter 38, verse 1, the Lord will speak to Job out of this thunderstorm. Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm. So the God has arrived. He apparently had been on his way in the last chapter or two as Elihu was talking about the storm approaching, and now he is here. And Job has wanted an audience with God, and now he has one. All throughout the book, Job has talked about how he wants to present his case before God. And so now he has the opportunity. God is here. He said, "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." So Job needs to be prepared. He needs to gird up his loins, be ready to take a stand, be ready to answer himself, be ready to present his case before God, which is what he's willing to do. He is now going to have the opportunity to do what he's been asking to do all throughout the book. Before he does that, God has some things he wants to ask Job, some things he wants Job to think about. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Tell me, if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, and all the angels, or sons of God, shouted for joy. Now the imagery being depicted here is that of a builder building a building. Again, don't get too caught up in the exact details of this imagery. The earth is a planet, it's not a building, so not all of this imagery is technically accurate. But the point being made here is that God is the one who planned the earth and made the earth. Who shut up the sea behind its doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness, when I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place, when I said, this far you may come and no farther, here your proud waves must stop. Basically, now remember, the sea would have been terrifying to these people. They would have been very scared of the sea. We talked about Leviathan. We'll mention Leviathan here again in a few chapters. All these stories of these creatures were based off of the fear of the sea. Like, what is the sea? What is in the sea? Every so often we get glimpses of these giant animals that live in the sea, and they're scary. So God is saying here, I limited the sea. I put the sea in its place, and I'm not letting it go an inch farther than where I assigned for it to go. Can you do that, Job? Can you tell the sea to stop its forward march? Have you ever given orders to the morning, or shown the dawn its place, that it might take the earth by the edges? That's the sun coming up on the horizon there. And shake the wicked out of it. Wickedness is done in the darkness. So when the sun comes up, the wicked flee. The earth takes shape like clay under a seal. That's when you sign a document with putting a seal in it of some kind. Its features stand out like those of a garment. The wicked are denied their light, and their upraised arm is broken. So they're ready to hit somebody, they're ready to attack somebody, but the light breaks their arm and takes away their power. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? So basically that means the bottom of the ocean, the bottom of the sea. Have the gates of death been shown to you? Now they would have thought the way of the underworld is at the bottom of the sea. Again, this is a glimpse into the way they thought of the world. God is speaking to Job here using imagery and phraseology that he'd be able to understand. Job would have conceived of the world, of the underworld, where the dead went. He's talking about that place a lot in this book. He's talked about the realm of the dead and wanting to go to be with the dead a lot. And he would have conceived it as being deep underneath the earth, or even underneath the water that's underneath the earth. So that's the imagery that God is tapping into here. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep, i.e. the bottom of the ocean floor? Have the gates of death been shown to you, which presumably are somewhere out in the bottom of the sea? Have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. What is the way to the abode of light? And where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years. Job is here talking as though he knows everything about the way the world works, the way the world should work. And God is here saying, I've been around from the beginning. This was all my doing. Where were you when I did all this stuff? Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain, and a path for the thunderstorm, to water a land where no man lives, a desert with no one in it, to satisfy a desolate wasteland, and make it sprout with grass? Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens, when the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen? Job doesn't do any of this stuff. Neither do I, neither do you. All this stuff happens. We may know more now about where it comes from and how it happens. We may know and understand more about the water cycle now than Job did. But we can't control it. Can you bind the beautiful Pleiades? These are stars up in the sky. We're now talking about the constellations and the stars. Can you loose the cords of Orion? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead the bear out with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Can you raise your voice to the clouds? Even if we know more about this stuff, and we know more about this stuff than Job did, that doesn't mean we can do anything about it. Just because we know more about the stars doesn't mean that we can actually control the stars, or that we tell them where to go and what to do. Can you raise your voice to the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of water? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you, here we are? Who engraved... I really don't like what you're doing here. There we go. Who engraved the heart... Who endowed the heart with wisdom, or gave understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to count the clouds? Who can tip over the water jars of the heavens when the dust becomes hard and the clouds of earth start to stick together? So we may know more about this stuff. We may know more about the rain cycle and the water cycle and where rain comes from and where it goes to, but we can't do anything about it. We can't actually control the rain. We can watch the meteorologists today tell us more about where they think the rain is coming from and where it's going, but they can't actually make it go anywhere. Do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of the lions? So now we're talking about creatures within creation. Up until now, we've been talking about just the features, the elemental forces of the world. Now we're talking about the animal kingdom, the creatures that God made within the world. I don't know why we don't have Job 39 started. This is certainly the last couple of verses of Job 38, but whenever they went and divided this book up into chapters, I think they made a mistake here, because this would be a more appropriate beginning to the next chapter, since it starts a new train of thought, but oh well. It is what it is at this point. I mean, the original text wouldn't have had chapters and verses, period. At some point, someone went along later and put those numbers in there. They didn't always break them up correctly. Like, this is an example of where we probably should have started chapter 39 a little bit before where chapter 38 ends. Anyway, chapter 38, verse 39. Do you hunt the prey for the lioness and satisfy the hunger of the lions when they crouch in their dens or lie in wait in the thicket? Now, the lions would have been a sign of power and strength and prowess as a hunter. You know, it's like they would have been feared. And, you know, this area in the world doesn't really have lions anymore, but back then they did. You can look at the imagery in their palaces, like in Assyria, places like that, and you'll see lots of imagery of the kings and rulers hunting lions, because being able to hunt lions or stand up to lions was a major feature of masculine strength back then. Now again, to the point where eventually they kind of hunted the lions out of that area. Yeah, I don't think you really see any. Lions nowadays, I think, are pretty strictly live in Africa. But at this point in time, they also lived in this region of the world, and were a frequent metaphor for hunting prowess, as well as a frequent target for kings who wanted to prove their ability to hunt. Who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God, or wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Do you count the months till they bear? Do you know the time they give birth? They crouch down and bring forth their young. Their labor pains are ended. Their young thrive and grow strong in the wilds. They leave and do not return. And Job had nothing to do with any of that. He might watch some of it. He might observe some of it from a distance. But he has nothing to do with any of it. Who let the wild donkey go free? Who untied his ropes? I gave him the wasteland as his home, the salt flats as his habitat. He laughs at the commotion in town. He does not hear a driver. He's wild. He's free. He's not domesticated. He does not hear a driver shout. He ranges the hills for his pastures and searches for any green thing. Will the wild ox consent to serve you? Will he stay by your manger at night? Can you hold him to the furrow with a harness? Will he till the valleys behind you? The answer, of course, is no. He's wild. He's not domesticated. We cannot tame these creatures that were not meant to be tamed. Will you rely on him for his great strength? Will you leave your heavy work to him? Can you trust him to bring in your grain and gather it to your threshing floor? The wings, hang on. Excuse me. The wings of the ostrich flap joyfully, but they cannot. The wings of the ostrich flap joyfully, but they cannot compare with the pinions and feathers of the stork, because they can't fly. The ostrich is a flightless bird that cannot. By the way, I mentioned it briefly with the lions, but you know, we are talking about a long time ago. Okay. It's hard to say exactly when Job was written or when it was supposed to take place, but we're talking possibly 3,700 years ago. You know, if it was in the generation, I think it took place at a time, around the time the Israelites were in Egypt, and we're talking the 1600s or so BC here for that. I think Job was probably doing his thing and living his life and going through all this around the time the Israelites were in Egypt. and the Israelites found out about it and heard about the story as they came out of Egypt and into their land. I don't know. I don't know. No one can really say for certain, but that's what seems most likely to me. So if that's accurate, if I'm correct in thinking that, then we're talking about a story that is 3,700 years old or so. We're talking about a guy who lived in the 1600s or so BC. A long time ago. Long time ago. And these are words in this book itself, whenever it was written, whether it was written by an Israelite shortly after they came into the land or sometime later, it's written to have the appearance of being old. Even at the time it was written, it's meant to feel old. So I don't know how precisely we've been able to identify some of these creatures. Like I said with the lion, as far as I'm aware, lions are not native to that region of the world any longer. They may have been there 3,600 years ago, but I don't believe you can find lions there any longer. I believe lions now are relegated to Africa. This isn't Africa. This is Edom, or wherever, somewhere east of Israel. So it's not Africa. So these creatures may not live in this region of the world any longer. And I'm not sure how certain we are with the identification of some of these creatures. So we're talking about ostrich is another example. I don't think ostriches appear in this region of the world any longer. I believe ostriches, like the lions, are now found only in Africa. I think this is the ostrich. I'm assuming he's talking about the ostrich as we know today, the ostrich we know today. I don't know how specific. I don't see any footnotes in this section of the text saying anything about these animals, whether or not because back when we read about some of the animals in Leviticus, remember, about some of those clean and unclean animals, we had all kinds of footnotes saying that the precise identification of some of them is uncertain. I'm not seeing any footnotes here saying that about these animals. So maybe we're certain, maybe we're not. We're going to have two of them later on here at the very end of this section, which are very uncertain, and we'll talk about those when we get there. But these are wild animals to be found in nature, both then and now, presumably. So I presume we're talking about the same thing, an ostrich here, that we're used to today when we think of ostriches. But ostriches, as far as I'm aware, don't appear in this region of the world today like they did back then, 36-ish hundred years ago. Anyway, ostriches. The wings of the ostrich flap joyfully, but they cannot compare with the pinions and feathers of the stork, because the ostrich cannot use her wings to fly. She lays her eggs on the ground and lets them warm in the sand, unmindful that a foot may crush them, or some wild animal may trample them. She treats her young harshly, as if they were not hers. She cares not that her labor was in vain. Now this is actually not completely accurate. This is how it would appear to be to Job as he observes the ostrich. Ostriches, though, will lay their eggs in packs, and the dominant female will kick out the eggs that aren't hers in the nest. And so those are the eggs that we're talking about here that get kicked aside. It seems like the ostrich is not minding or not caring for the young because they're not hers, because they're not hers. She kicks out the eggs that are not hers, the dominant female would. But whatever the case, however she does this or why ever she does this, here's what God has to say about it. For God did not endow her with wisdom or give her a share of good sense. So she operates the way she does. The ostrich, obviously there are male ostriches too. The ostrich operates the way it does because that's the way God made it to. It may not make sense to us. When we watch the ostrich, when Job watches the ostrich, when Job observes the ostrich engaging in these weird behaviors, it may not make sense to Job. But God made the ostrich to do it that way. The ostrich does what the ostrich does because that's how God made the ostrich. God did not endow the ostrich with wisdom or give the ostrich a share of good sense. For whatever the reason, he just didn't. Yet when she spreads her feathers to run, she laughs at horse and rider. The ostrich cannot run a horse. The ostrich can run at very, very high rates of speed for a prolonged period of time. So whatever, it may not make sense to us, and we might not understand why God made the ostrich the way he did, but he made the ostrich that way. However silly it may seem, however bizarre it may seem, the ostrich is the way it is because that's the way God made it. Do you give the horse his strength, or clothe his neck with a flowing mane? Do you make him leap like a locust, striking terror with his proud snorting? He paws fiercely, rejoicing in his strength, and charges into the fray. He laughs at fear, afraid of nothing. He does not shy away from the sword. They used horses in battle, all the way back deep into ancient history. The quiver rattles against his side, along with the flashing spear and lance. In frenzied excitement, he eats up the ground. He cannot stand still when the trumpet sounds. At the blast of the trumpet, he snorts, "Aha!" He catches the scent of battle from afar, the shout of commanders, and the battle cry. So the guy and the horse does this because God made him to do that. The horse is doing what God made him to do. When he jumps into battle, when he rushes right into the thick of things, he's doing what God made him to do. Just like all the other creatures. When the lioness hunts her prey, or crouches in the dens and lies in wait for its prey in the thickets, or the ravens, or any other animals we mentioned, they operate the way they do because that's the way God made them to. We may not understand it. We certainly don't control it. Even if we do understand it, we certainly don't control it. We certainly have no influence over it. We didn't make the horse the way the horse is. The horse is a domesticated animal. We can ride horses. But we didn't make the horse what it is. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread his wings toward the south? So does he know when and where to migrate because you told him to? No. Does the eagle soar at your command and build his nest on high? He dwells on a cliff and stays there at night. A rocky crag is his stronghold. From there he seeks out his food. His eyes detect it from afar. His young ones feast on blood, and where the slain are, there he is. These would largely be unclean animals, by the way. So God is highlighting. Now, I don't know, Job, I don't think, lived under he was not an Israelite. Probably was either a contemporary of Moses or maybe even preceded Moses in time. He certainly wasn't an Israelite, even if he and Moses were contemporaries or he came after Moses. So either way, he would not have been bound by the Mosaic covenant established at Sinai because he was not an Israelite. So I don't know whether or not he was aware of clean and unclean animals, or whether it made a difference to him, even if he was aware of it, because again, he was not an Israelite. But these are largely unclean animals that we're talking about here, and God is saying, "I made them this way." Whatever you think about in terms of clean or unclean, or whatever you think about these creatures, I made them this way. They are the way they are because I made them that way, and you had nothing to do with them. They aren't the way they are because you did anything about it. They are the way they are because God made them that way. The Lord said to Job, "Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him." So now Job has his chance to speak. This is what he's been waiting for. This is what he's been asking for. This is what he's been longing for, is a chance to present his case to God. So God has come in. He's given his opening speech, basically just demonstrating Job's inadequacy to do any of this stuff. The answer to all these questions that God is asking here is no. Job cannot do any of this stuff. Whether it comes down to being there when the earth was made, or having any control over the forces of nature that are part of the earth's natural cycle, or any of the control over the animals, the answer to all these questions is no. Job cannot do any of this stuff. We cannot do any of this stuff. And we have to answer the same thing that Job has to answer here. We can't do any of this stuff. We can understand it, and maybe to a certain degree we do understand it. I think to a large degree we can understand this stuff better than Job did, but we can't control it. Just because we understand it better doesn't mean we have any ability to control or influence it. So now Job has his chance to speak. What's he going to say? He's been wanting this all throughout the book. What's he going to say? Then Job answered the Lord, "I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more." So Job is literally speechless. He has nothing else to say. Already, And God's not even done, by the way. We've still got half of his discourse left to go. But already Job has been silenced. Because Job now acknowledges that he cannot do the things that God does. So what position is he in, ultimately, to criticize or accuse God of anything? Isn't that a question that we all ultimately need to think about to ourselves? Let him who accuses God answer him. I think at some point, we may not all experience what Job experienced. I have not experienced suffering to the degree that Job did. But I've had to ask this question of myself before too. Let him who accuses God answer him. I have complained plenty about the way that God has set up this world. I have had big complaints about the way that God has set this world. And I believe that at some point in all of our lives, all of us do. I believe that everybody who's ever lived and at least reached a certain stage of mental development to think about these things has to wrestle with the question of whether or not we're satisfied with the way God made the world. I think at some point all of us have some kind of a complaint to lodge against God. And I think in the end, I don't think that when we get to the end of this section, God is going to tell Job to sacrifice on behalf of the three friends who were arguing with him, because those guys argued or spoke wrongly about God, whereas Job didn't. And Job said a lot of things that you would think would be speaking wrongly about God. But God apparently was not unhappy with what Job said about him. So I think that God does not mind us airing our grievances and complaints to him, as long as we are sincerely trying to work our way through these things. Job said a lot of things about God that you could say were very questionable, but he said them from the perspective that he wanted to resolve them. He wanted to get close to God again. He was trying to figure these things out. He wasn't saying them cynically or sarcastically or spitefully. He was saying them from the position of someone whose heart was broken and who wanted to know more about God. So I don't think it's wrong for us to have these doubts or grievances or complaints. In fact, I think God expects it. I think God is completely. I think He's secure enough in Himself to be able to handle it. I don't think that our complaints to Him affect His sense of security or well-being. I think the problem comes in when we don't legitimately try to work through these complaints and grievances, and we just store them up in our hearts and use them as an excuse to turn away from God or pursue other things. That's where the problem comes in, I believe. Okay, so now after this, we're going to read the next section of Job, the last part of Job, the second half of God's discourse. I'll read in the next video.